What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke. Probably sound at least a little bit different. I completely lost my voice last night at the Steeler game. Was there for the Steelers Dolphins for Thursday Night Football. Unfortunately, Steelers did not end up winning, but we're back at it here with a week of PGA DFS. Got Live Golf over the weekend. That'll be Friday through Sunday, which I'll be at in person down there at Trump Doral. And in this stream here, going to review all of our lineups from last week. Going to go through our top plays, GPP winning lineups around the industry, just to kind of gauge what to expect from some of the optimals, what are some of the takeaways that we can learn from, and some transparency, right? How I ended up doing last week, where our ownership projections were, some of our top plays, core picks, how did they end up panning out, all that sort of fun stuff. So sit back, drink your coffee. Hopefully my voice isn't too raspy for you guys. We can get this job done. So let's go over to Draftkings. Let me bring up what we have on this end, which for the GPP winning lineup, the $25,000 to first contest, of course, had Rory McIlroy, but maybe a little bit surprising here, and really where I think this differentiated itself from a lot of the other top end lineups was they had Rory and a Jon Rahm. If you look at some of the other top finishers, a lot of them were more balanced, right? It was a Rory, then dropping down into the 8 and 7K range. Third place also had Jon Rahm. But a lot of the other guys here in the top 10 didn't have that combination. And if I were to run the analysis trying to see exactly how many combinations of those two there were, I would imagine it was probably sub 1%, where, if you took 30% and multiplied it by 20, you'd get something closer to 6%. So, the theoretical average, I'm assuming, was a lot higher than the actual combination average came in. And a lot of the reason for that is the price, right? $11,100, $10,900. You're investing $22,000 into two players, and you're left with $28,000 for 4 spots, or 7K remaining per player. But it was doable, right? You had guys like a Brendan Steele on the slate. Let me think down low. Gary Woodland, who played exceptionally well at $6,400. Lee at $6,800. Kurt Kitayama was the nuts, right? Scored 113 points at $7,100. That sort of build, because of how soft the pricing was, we had all of those top end players towards the bottom of the board, really made a lot of sense. And that's why you saw some of those lineups take down GPP. So I just wanted to point that out, is a lot of times people out there have this false misconception that when you're going out there and trying to take down tournaments, you have to be balanced. They hardly ever go into the 6K range. I hear that all the time, and that really isn't always true, particularly when you have soft pricing. Major championships are a similar type of situation. You want to be trying to take the top end guys, and to take 2-3 players up there above $9,000. You could see this was just 2 because it was 2 11K options. Now, if you went with like a $10,000 and then 2 $9,500 golfers, it would be the same idea, right? It lets you spend up for an extra stud in either circumstance. And if the players down low aren't that much worse than what we have up top, it's always something that I'm willing to mix in. So it's good to see that, JPB took down the tournament with that sort of lineup. Brick75 is a huge name around the industry, so good on him for finishing in second place. Let's see who he had. He had Rory, of course, who was the bane of my existence this week. Was the sole reason why I ended up having a horrible week, which is going to happen when a piece of Mega Chalk goes out there and not only wins, but smashes. I believe he was the top scorer by at least 26, 27 points. So hats off to Rory there. He had himself a week, but Brick75 had Hatton with that. Of course, he was a core pick for us. Tommy Fleetwood, a pick I talked up, had plenty of Aaron Wise and Kurt Kitayama. So this sort of lineup, right? Like I had the nuts to it, except no Rory McIlroy. So it's just nothing crazy up top, right? Like a Jon Rahm, Harman, I played Kitayama again. I didn't have Lee, so that's a piece that would be really nice to have. But look at this guy who finished, I believe it was in like 5th or 6th place. Let me find it. There's a guy up here that finished, right, it is 8th place, with Russell Henley in his lineup. He only scored 63 points. And then Wyndham Clark, who, by the way, made a hole-in-one there on Saturday, which I saw in person, which was insane. I've never seen a hole-in-one before in person. I've had a couple close calls myself to getting one, but I've never seen one go down up until that point. So he obviously got a few extra points because of that, got the ace points there. But this guy had 2 duds, but because he had both of those guys up top, right? 108 points for Jon Rahm, the nuts with Rory McIlroy, Kitayama and Lee that smashed. He still finished in the top 10 of the GPP. You don't have to be perfect, right? That was something that we honed on last week. To finish in the top 1% of these contests, you don't have to have the exact set of 6 players. That's the optimal lineup. Because I can tell you right now, this set of 6 players was not the optimal lineup. The top 6 scores on the slate were Brendan Todd, and I'm starting from number 6, okay? Brendan Todd, Jon Rahm, KH Lee, Fleetwood, Kitayama, and McIlroy. You could fit all 6 of those players into a lineup, right? So you could have had the top 6 players. It's just no one had Brendan Todd in a lot of those top-end lineups. But the rest of them made plenty of sense. You could have fit them all into lineups. I'm like 99. Yeah, you could have. You 100% could have fit those guys into lineups. So you don't have to have that set of 6 players to take all the contests down. But realistically, I don't think it was that crazy to get to those players, right? Because Brendan Todd was 2.5% owned. I'm on my other sheet right now, which we'll get to here in a second, which has all the ownership, my ownership, and everything like that. Jon Rahm was 21%. You had right around 5% on a KH Lee. Tommy Fleetwood was 10.8. Kurt Kitayama was 6.2% owned. So all of those players, right? Like you could have easily gone to that lineup. It's not like one of them was 0.1% owned, one of them was 0.5% owned. Yet that lineup didn't take down the GPP. Just note that, right? Even when an optimal, and by the way, that spends nearly all of your salary taking those 6 players. I believe you're only leaving like $400, $500 on the table. No one got to that. That's extremely notable, right? When we're trying to get some of these takeaways from contests, and there was 23,000 entries in this contest, 23 different chances to get to that combination of players, and it didn't end up happening. So the end all be all here is, right, if you have plays up top that you really like, even if you have to take ugly plays down low, don't be afraid to do so, right? It's not like Brendan still smashed, right? He only scored 71 points. It's that salary that let him take in Jon Rahm up top that won him the GPP, right? Aaron Wise was pretty chalky, 14%. We already talked about KH Lee and Kitayama. Made a lot of sense. A lot of people talked them up and played them this week. You got to be willing to take some of these dirty plays down low to take down these contests. So that's just what I wanted to point out there. I'll go through a couple lineups, I suppose. You know, Petter Gibbons, another DFS professional that I like to look at his lineups. I had everyone here but Rory and myself, so they all make sense, right? Bombers at a course that was relatively long. Kitayama, by the way, is an extremely long player. A lot of people don't give him the credit for that. Clark, extremely long. Lee Hodges, you know, a solid ball striker himself. This sort of lineup just, it makes a lot of sense in hindsight, right? You look at it, you're like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Let's look at a few of the other lineups here. Dust, another guy, actually the other week, Dust was towards the top of the leaderboard too. I just remember the name there. So I want to look at his lineup, right? He's been in the top 15, I think 2 weeks in a row here now. Similar, right? These ball striking aggressive players. I mean, I literally, except for Brendan Todd, I had all of them except for Rory, right? And we're going to get to the Rory situation here in a second and what it did to me this week. Because I'm trying to point out that like these lineups up top, like I was on most of these players, and I'm just going to pull the Band-Aid off right now. On $750 in entries, we made $66 back. And we're going to go through the player pool here in a second. It's even more comical when you look at like the top 20 scores and how many I had in my player pool. Not having Rory McIlroy literally killed you this week, because not only was he the winner, right? He was 30% owned in this contest, but he scored 140 fantasy points. And I'm going to bring up the other tab here now just to show you the difference in scoring. That was a whole 26 points more than Kurt Kitayama, who put up an insane score himself. So you can see right here, right, a 26-point gap between first and second. Tommy Fleetwood scored 111 points, so now it's a 28.5-point gap there. If you didn't have Rory, you had to make up 28 points on 30% of the field. And that contest I was in, guys, had 23,000 entries. So over 8,000 entries had Rory McIlroy this week, which really put me behind the 8 ball. Essentially, and by the way, the cash rate in that contest was like 18-20% in those large field GPPs. I had to make up 28 points on the field just to try and min cash at the top 18%, which that's what happens, right, in that sort of contest. And the reason why I want to show this, it's honestly the reason why I'm doing these live streams, is for weeks like this, because no DFS pro is going to talk about it, right? Is you have to be willing to eat losses like that. And that was kind of the MO last week, right? I talked about how your mindset has to be right to understanding that weeks like that are going to happen. And I don't want to say like I kind of felt like that was going to happen if I was fading Rory, but I certainly knew it was a possibility, right? You know, it was kind of that mindset where you have to be willing to take those risks, because if Rory would have fallen flat on his face, right, finished like I'd say even like a Max Homa, right, at 91, you know, finishing, let's say, right around like 88, 86 points in that range, the slate's completely different. I mean, then the nuts play up top is Jon Rahm, and then potentially even a Sam Burns at $9,300. And you're looking at a completely different set of ROI, because, you know, we're going to talk about, I think it's spot like, yeah, from like Jon Rahm down to here, there's only like 2-3 players that I didn't have. So of the top 15 fantasy scores, I believe I had at least like 12 of them. It was a tough seed, right? Whenever you have that 30% guy that ends up winning, you go, oh, of course I should have played Rory McIlroy. But in hindsight, I wouldn't have changed my decision. If I knew he was going to be 30% owned, and I thought he was going to be like 27%. So what did I have him at? Yeah, 27.6% ownership. He came even higher owned than I expected. If anything, that makes him an even better fade, right? So when I saw that ownership, and in some of the larger field contests, I believe in the $15 GPP, he was closer to 33% ownership. I would do it again, right? If you could tell me right now at the same golf course, same field, everything like that, that he was going to be 33% owned guaranteed going into the same event, I'd fade him again, right? It's the same. Like, I'm willing to take losses like I took this week, because in the long term, I understand that the payout for going after those other outcomes, which are, by the way, are just as likely as Rory McIlroy winning. It's not like he's going to win this 5 out of 10 times. If you play 10 tournaments there in the same conditions, he probably wins like 2 of them at the very most, right? Which is 1 in 5 odds. That's fantastic, right? There's a reason why he's the world number 1 at this point, but he's not going to perform half or even, you know, more than that of the time getting to that sort of performance. It's just, that's not realistic, right? Look at anyone's game log. I mean, even Tiger Woods in his prime, which is like a crazy example. It's a huge outlier there, but just to drive this point home, it's not like he was winning every single golf tournament, right? Like, it felt like he was, but it was usually like 1 out of every 3, maybe like 1 in every 2.5 was, I think, his average for quite some time. Now in majors, it was a higher percentage, right? But we're not talking about majors. That, even those type of percentages, right? 1 out of every 2.5 events it's right on the edge of like 30% chalk right now. If we had DFS around then, Tiger would have been like 80% owned, right? He wouldn't be some 33% owned player like a Rory McIlroy. So it would have been a different equation, but then you might have started to consider, right, taking him at 30%, right? It's getting right on that border at that point. When you're running your numbers, he's not Tiger Woods. He's not playing against weak fields. And I hate to say it, right? Tiger Woods was playing against inferior competition based on what these players are out there today. Don't treat some of these guys like Tiger Woods. Anybody at 30% ownership. Shit. For this week at the Bermuda, by the way, the field is dog shit. I don't see anybody getting close to 30% ownership. But if anybody's even close to 20%, I'm fading them instantly. The field is so even across the board when it comes to their talent level. It's even more so the case in like what we had for this week with Rory McIlroy, right? Who, you can make an argument that he's just such a good player that you had to play him this week. And I kind of told people, like, I understood that argument, right? I know a lot of people played him, still went out there, played Rory McIlroy, which made sense to me. Just, you had to really like him. You had to be convinced that he was going to win that golf tournament. And, kind of like I was saying with those metrics there, even with Tiger in his prime, I can't count on that happening more than like a third of the time, right? And in this sort of field, I kind of had Rory McIlroy's win equity as like a fifth. I thought he was like, probably should be like plus 500, something like that, to go out there and win the golf tournament. I think he was plus 650, plus 700 by the end of the week. So I actually did think it was a value bet to take Rory McIlroy. But when you're looking at the ownership numbers, it didn't eclipse that rate, right? He wasn't above a 30% win rate in my metrics. So even though I thought he was a good outright bet this week, I didn't think he was the best DFS play. So I just wanted to give my nuanced take on Rory McIlroy there. Essentially, I'm not really changing my strategy going forward. I knew it was going to happen, right? That was kind of like the point last week. The whole point of me going through some of that is to kind of prime that. It's going to happen from time to time. So we'll see about that. Tom says, yeah, dude, I also had a shitty ROI about Rory. Exactly. You had to make a stand. That is, I'm glad that you have the same perspective as me. That's essentially how you have to be thinking, because if you're having results like that and then you're reacting and changing your process, you're going to be chasing, right? Because next time out, if you go, okay, I'm going to play the chalk, right? The chalk ends up missing because you have to stick to your strategy to bear out those results. If you're flip-flopping every single week, you're going to see no consistency. You're going to get just wild swings out there, and you don't want that to happen. So I'm glad that you're on board there, Tom. You said same with you, willing to eat those chalk wins, especially like with NFL. So this week, I was a little bit of a chalk donkey when it came to NFL. I was feeling myself a little bit with the chalk. There is like Josh Jacobs. I played I believe it was 65% on the last run that I went with. So it worked out this week in NFL, but it's very rare, that I'm eating the chalk. I'm usually off it. He said, yeah, Tiger's a data anomaly for sure. Exactly. So, and that's kind of why I used it as the outlier example, because, if he's winning like 1 out of every 2.5 starts, and that's still hardly even worth being a 30% chalk piece, like what are we doing with some of these other guys, right? Like that clearly just aren't that same type of player. So yeah, that's the point there with the anomaly. Yeah, is to point that out. It's just a little bit ridiculous. Let's talk about some of the other guys up here. So I didn't play Kitayama. I thought he might be a little bit higher owned. I mean, I had him at 7%. He came in at 6.2. So I guess it wasn't too far off there. But, in higher dollar contests, he was higher owned. So that's kind of the sentiment that I was behind. I thought that a lot of really sharp people were going to play Kitayama this week. And the reason why is I thought he was a sharp play, right? But anytime I see a ton of people that even people I respect, by the way, that are behind somebody, I tend to question it because then I'm like, I have to compete against those guys, right? Like when that piece of chalk hits, well, it's not really chalk, right? He was 6.2% owned. When that piece hits, right, then I'm competing against guys that I know are on pretty similar players that I'm on, or at least using a pretty sharp process. So I just pivoted off him, right? It's not like I faded him. It's not like, I went out there was purposefully not having him in my lineups. It's just somebody I didn't get to because I thought other guys around him at the same price tag might pay off. So in hindsight, that sucked. I wish I played Kurt. I thought he was a good play, but I guess I outsmarted myself there a little bit. So definitely something to note and improve on is don't outsmart yourself. If somebody's a good play, they're not highly owned, you probably should just play them. Right? That's probably the end all be all. Tommy Fleetwood at 7,600. I played the shit out of him this week. You can see I had him at 20% of lineups. Ownership actually came in a little bit higher than expected. Maybe some of the people putting out content like myself, a few other people in the industry also talked up a Tommy Fleetwood. So not really surprising that he came in a little bit higher steamed than that. But I still had right about 2x the field, which worked out nicely. KH Lee, I considered playing. I just didn't get to, kind of for the same reason as Kitayama. It wasn't so much that I saw other people on KH Lee. It's that there were other guys at $6,800 that were lower owned that I thought were better plays. And of course, it doesn't always end up working out. And you didn't have to have KH Lee to hit the nuts. You kind of saw that when we went through some of those top end lineups. Kitayama was in almost every single one. Of course, Rory, Tommy Fleetwood were common names in those top 5-6 lineups. But KH Lee was just a nice bonus to have because you had guys like a Todd that went off, right? He only scored, 8 less fantasy points and was a little bit cheaper. You had a few cheaper options like a Lee Hodges at $6,300 that you saw in a lot of those top end lineups. Wyndham Clark at 6,800. Even Ryan Palmer, right? Ryan Palmer scored 74.5 points. Those sort of value picks, pretty much if you took any combination of those 2 or 3 and then had, that core 3 up top, you were in a really good spot this week. So that's what you were looking at with the optimal. The optimal lineup I was talking about before were these 6 golfers, and you could fit these 6 into a lineup. So it was Rory, John Rahm, then you had Fleetwood, Kitayama, KH Lee, and Brendan Todd, which I'm like 99%. Yeah, you 100% can build that lineup. It's actually only leaving $100 on the table if you build that lineup. I can't believe no one had it, right? Because look at these ownership numbers, right? That's kind of what I was pointing out before. The lowest on guys 2.5% owned, then 4.8, 6.2. I mean, that's realistic. I mean, 6.2% of 23,000 entries. I mean, that's a very significant portion of people. I'm surprised that we didn't see that lineup there. So that's worth noting, right? In the first 3 streams we've done this, the optimal lineup hasn't even been close to being entered into the large field GPP. So just something to keep in mind there. In terms of some of the guys that made it towards the top, but perhaps weren't nuts plays, I had a ton of them, right? So guys that were close in contention, but really couldn't end up closing, like a Billy Horschel, Aaron Wise, who actually came in lower owned than I expected, which was nice because I played 22%. I was looking to get 1.5x leverage and ended up getting right around a little bit more than that, right? Like 1.6, 1.65x leverage, which worked out fine. I didn't want to make my week like boom or bust based on Aaron Wise. If he played well, I wanted to have a little bit more than the field to take advantage of the rake. And if he played poorly, I didn't want to overexpose myself. So that was the idea there. Billy Horschel was a sleeper pick. We talked him up, and he played pretty well. Just the ownership came up a little bit. I know I talked him up. A few other people around the industry also talked up Billy Horschel this week. So maybe not a surprise that he got steamed there. Moving into the value tier here, Lee Hodges I loved. So I played 7%, which was right around 2x the field. That ended up being a plus play. Max Homa, I didn't go crazy on. So I also gave him I'd say the Aaron Wise treatment, where I thought he was going to be actually a little bit higher owned, I should say, than an Aaron Wise, but I only took 22%. I didn't want to have my week hinging on his success. If he went out there, finished in the top 5, top 10, I would have enough lineups to hopefully take something down with a combination. And if he played poorly, my week wasn't over either. So the real, I guess, leverage points here, right? What I want to point out are John Rahm, who I played 38% of, and Tom Kim. Both of them were, I would say, my most convicted plays, the guys that I thought were going to win this golf tournament. I bet both of them outright. So even though I thought Rory was a good bet, I didn't end up firing on that bet, but I did fire on a John Rahm outright and a Tom Kim outright. And through the first few rounds, especially after round 3 for John Rahm, I felt pretty good about my position. Tom Kim after round 1 even, right, was in a really solid spot there. Kind of sputtered over the weekend, but you can see here I got 2x the field on a Tom Kim and then up there with John Rahm. Not quite 2x the field, but I played him in nearly 40% of my lineups. You can see a lot of the other guys I'm taking up top, I wasn't nearly as aggressive with. And the main reason for that is we're in the no-cut event. There's 78 players. You're playing over a 4-round event. It's not like you're in a 156 player field where, because there's so many options to choose from, you can't play a large portion of the field. This week, if I went through, I think it was like 36 players in total in my player pool. That was nearly half the field, right? So I was able to get a pretty even spread there. Most of my plays were 2x the field, but I did have to mix in a few that I was 1.5x on. But I mentioned it last week. I'll reiterate it right now. I'm not against playing 1.5x players, taking somebody as partial leverage rather than the full 2x leverage that has been thrown out there by some of the talking heads over the last few years. I don't think it's always necessary. Like the whole point of playing somebody in your lineups. And, I get the idea of wanting to move up a portion of your portfolio, right, over everybody else to get into the cash. I understand that. When you have 2x the field, right, you're going to have more lineups moving into the cash than theoretically the field is in that same sort of scenario. That's not how GPPs work, right? Like, you're not trying to min cash in GPPs. In GPPs, you're trying to get the nuts lineup, right? You're trying to get the perfect combination of players. Let's say that 22%, and this is really for players in 15% ownership, right? Because if you're at 6%, just put them in 12% of lineups. It's really not that difficult, right? But when somebody's 15 to maybe 18% ownership, like I had on a Max Homa here, we have to be very aggressive about our exposure to get true quote unquote leverage, right? To get that 2x number. And it's not nearly as easy, or there's a lot more opportunity cost involved with going to that sort of player than one of those 6K options. And personally, this is just my style, right? I'm aggressive in general, right? I do a lot of fading of the top owned players. I'm looking to take down contests, right? Not min cash. That's my idea here. I'm still willing to take 1.5x on certain players because 22% of 150 lineups is 33 different combinations. 33 combinations is at least enough to cover most of my top end lineups, right? Most of the top end combinations player pool where, if my core plays end up hitting, I'm probably going to have at least the top 4 or 5 scores, right? If they're in that core. Like if I was, for example, playing 35% rather than 22, sure, that's 52 lineups that end up having that player as opposed to something like 33. It's not really that much of a difference. Sure, you get an extra few shots at it, But with 33, that's a respectable number. It's enough to cover enough outcomes where I feel pretty good about it. So for guys like Max Homa that I'm kind of half sold on, like an Aaron Wise that was kind of like half sold on for this week, those are the sort of stances that I'm willing to take. So that's the thought process. It's not about bin cashing, right? And I think that's important to note here. I feel like a lot of people that put out that sort of narrative are like saying it from like the portfolio perspective of like, oh, we're going to get more lineups into the cash or so on and so forth. As long as you got enough lineups moving up into the contention, it doesn't matter, right? Like how many are bin cashing. Like if I cashed $160 this week rather than $66, it's not going to change my week. It's not going to make me feel better or worse about my results. So that's what I'll say about that. Matty Fitz played pretty well. Same thing with Montgomery. Montgomery shot 9 under par on the last day. That was ridiculous. So I wasn't there to see that, but hats off to him. He's a stud. Absolutely insane putter from what I've heard. Trahan clearly likes the golf course. Played well from tee to green once again around Congaree. So that's something to note if they go back there. Cameron Davis, like him at 7,500. He's just you're always going to play him in a long golf course. I mean, that's kind of the idea with a Cam Davis or a golf course where it's wide open off the tee and you don't have to worry about accuracy so much. But what I didn't know about this course that we know going forward now is it looks so much like an Australian golf course. You have all those bunkers that he's going to feel at home. I mean, he talked about it in a few of his pressers, but it showed with his performance this week. His tee to green stats were a lot better than most of the field. His bunker play in particular, getting up and down from the bunkers, he was top 10 in the field. All things that bode well for him going forward here. If his ball striking is just a little bit sharper, with the around the green play that he seems to be comfortable with, and the green speeds, I'll say that too. They were running at right around like a 14, 15 on the stint meter for the first 3 days. I'm sure on Sunday it was much of the same there. I wasn't there though. That plays into his department too, because they're used to that out there in Australia. Hoagie and Cameron Young fades were okay, right? They didn't break the slate. They didn't go off. And they did come in relatively high owned, right? He had Cam Young actually 18% higher than I thought. And Tom Hoagie was 12%, which was a little bit lower than the 15% that I had him at, but still well higher than a lot of his peers. So I'm pretty glad I got off of that. But yeah, again, they didn't kill you, right? If you played them, like they were still solid plays. They scored like 80 fantasy points. It's just you weren't going to win the large field GPP with them, which is the idea of pretty much all the content that I'm putting out. Ryan Palmer, I liked him as a sleeper pick. I talked about him to my Discord quite a bit. He was a Texas, loves firm and fast sort of condition. So the more that we heard about how crunchy it was there on site, the more that I liked Ryan Palmer. Mito Pereira was okay. He actually came in lower owned than I expected. So I played 18%, which was nearly 2x leverage. He was trying to give him the Aaron Wise treatment, right? Another player that I was trying to get like 1.5x leverage on that I ended up getting a little bit more of. I did play a few of these, I'd say like firm and fast specialists, like a Matt Kuchar and a Ricky Fowler. Ricky Fowler in particular, I did not want to have very much of. I played right around 10%, which was pretty much exactly at the field. I tried to match the field on Ricky. I don't want to call it FOMO because that's not really what it was. It's not like I was like fearing like missing out on like him going out there and smashing. It was like, okay, it was last week legitimate, like him hitting all those fairways, all those greens. Is that a sign of things to come? So I decided to try and buy back in on it. If he ended up succeeding, I would have been right at the field. If he, flopped like he pretty much ended up doing, it didn't kill me either. So I like to point out those players because a lot of these guys I really like, where I try to get 2x the field on, but some of them it's a little bit less aggressive with. So like a Shane Lowry here, I was extremely aggressive about. I played 2x the field. I played 30% of. Played 25% JT, which was another player where I was 1.5x on. The Victor Hovland fade worked out. He was not very sharp around the greens, also not very accurate off the tee. Keith Mitchell fade ended up working out. He also dealt with issues with his accuracy off the tee. So something to know about Congaree going forward is we have to look at guys that are solid off the tee, right? Tom Kim, Kurt Kitayama, Rory McIlroy, John Rahm, all elite of the elite level off the tee players. We're up there in the top 5, right? So just something to note going forward. It's both distance and accuracy at this golf course. Davis Riley actually played a lot better in terms of his fantasy score than he did on the leaderboard. He was way, way over par to start the event. And then by the end of the week, ended up having a respectable 63.5 points, which, when you compare him to guys like a Lowry, who had an exceptional week through the first 3 days, what he scored 6.5 points less than a Shane Lowry, and he was a whole $1,400 less. I mean, you could argue that Davis Riley had a better week than somebody like a Shane Lowry. So, we got to make sure we're looking at fantasy production, not just your leaderboard production, because Davis Riley, half the reason you want to play him in DFS is the birdie upside that he brings to the table. So just wanted to point that out. Let's look for a few other guys that maybe outperformed their leaderboard position. So we have Davis Riley. He was a clear example of that. Bio Kim was another one. He outperformed his position there. Let's see. We'll find a few others. Gary Woodland, I suppose, because he had such a bad last 2 rounds, he ended up way over par, but still scored 60 points based on his first 2 days, which were excellent. Sahith Theegala, another one. He went out there, had a horrible day 1, shot a 79, and then rebounded over the next 3 days, was able to put up a little bit of birdie production. Let's see what else we've got. I mean, I guess that's really it. Everybody else was right towards the bottom of the fantasy production board. You're always going to get these aggressive players like a Sahith. It's not a surprise that somebody like Davis Riley was another example of one of these aggressive players that ended up doing well. They're always going to outperform their leaderboard position. And when they get into contention, they're going to be a borderline nuts play, because then they're getting placement points and all the extra birdie production that even got them into contention. So I'm always willing to get there. They didn't even have the best week, but they're doing exactly what we were, expecting them to, right? To go out there, still make birdies, even if they're out of it. And for a contest like this, where there's no cut, it's something that we have to consider. Now, if this was the Sanderson Farms, right, where after the first 2 rounds you get cut, they're not going to get the chance to go out there and make up all of those points. But in a no-cut event, like, you want to be taking shots on the guys that are higher birdie percentage players, that are aggressive, that are going to go out there and post 20, maybe 25 birdies on the week. And that's what those sort of players were able to do. So, yeah, I think that's all I've got, boys. I just wanted to go through a few of these. Let's sort this. Actually, yeah, let me sort this one more time. We're going to sort this by ownership now. Just go through the chalk. Just go through who was the highest owned. So 1 second here. Let's custom sort. We will sort it by K and do highest to smallest. Perfect. All right. So we know Rory was the highest owned, right? He was up there at 30 point. Oh, I think I sorted it by the wrong column, or did I? No, I did it by the right column. Sweet. So Rory McIlroy was your highest owned, then Jon Rahm. Victor Hovland came in way higher owned than even I expected, right? Having it at 17.5%, he came in at 20.5. That's something to keep an eye on. I don't even understand why he got steamed up. So I don't even really have many theories for that. The only thing I'd kind of spitball in terms of an idea there is that he's a likable guy. People like playing Victor Hovland. So maybe it was that. Cameron Young always comes in higher owned than I expect. I think it's that same story, but I've kind of been on that for quite some time. And then Jordan Spieth too. He came in 5% higher owned than I expected. He's just a likable guy on tour. So these Victor Hovland, Jordan Spieth, and Cameron Youngs, I think we just have to artificially start boosting their ownership even more. It's something that I usually account for. I talk about my sentiment rating all the time when it comes to how I do my ownership projections. I think I have to boost them to like elite levels at this point, like to a point where they're getting a 4 or 5% bump on every single slate. So that's something to note. Our ownership across the board outside of that, right? Like within 2.5% on a Rory, I feel pretty good about that. Within 1% on a Jon Rahm, I feel pretty good about. I mean, even 3% there, I feel decent about. I mean, 3% right here with Cam Young, it's within reason. I mean, they're not the best, right? Especially when we compare to like this range where everything is within 1%, 0.7% right there, 1.6. That's about average, I'd say. 1.3, 0.2%. Sanjay came in a little bit lower owned than I expected. So I actually don't know why that's the case, because he was coming in with such good form too. So worth noting there. Within 1% on a lot of these other players there. So our ownership this week, particularly up top, was like spot on. It treated us really well there. It's just we didn't use it properly, right? We faded Rory McIlroy, which again, I'm going to say for like the 5th time now. I'll do it again. I'll do it 10,000 times, particularly if you tell me he's going to be 30% owned beforehand. The process is there though, right? Our ownership projections are looking pretty spiffy at this point. And even our core picks, right? So if we were to just look at our core picks from this week, Jon Rahm, right, second highest scorer. Tom Kim up there played pretty well. We know Scotty was disappointing. We'll say that. Scotty Scheffler was definitely a disappointing pick, but Matty Fitz played well. Same thing with Taylor Montgomery, and Terrell Hatton was another top like 10 finisher, something like that. I mean, outside of Scotty Scheffler, they all smashed, right? They all finished in the top 20, were top 15 fantasy scores on the slate. I feel pretty solid about our process right now. I don't think we need to change too much. Just a few things ownership wise that I think we can learn from, right? A few of the more popular players were higher round this week. And hey, we need that chalky 30% player to end up failing next time. But that is all I've got for y'all here. Going to go ahead and sign off. We'll be doing this every single week. Hopefully my voice next time won't be quite as raspy. Hopefully throughout the day, I'll be able to do my content as per usual as my voice starts to come back. But until then, guys, best of luck with all of your week, whether it's for, Bermuda, we have that going on this week. We have, football going on Monday night, Thursday night football. I'll be putting out content for both of those. And then, of course, live golf too, which I'll be at throughout the weekend. I'll be focusing a little bit more on live golf personally for fantasy this week than I will be for the PGA Tour. The fields aren't even close. And then I'm going to be at the live tour event, right? So I might as well put some fantasy lineups in play while I'm out there sweating it. But it'll be fun. All of my buddies, I have like a caravan of like 15 guys. We're going to the first off to the event. They have a few after parties too, where Snoop Dogg's playing. Who else? Chainsmokers is playing. Travis Scott is playing down here in Miami. So like live golf's doing it right. I have to say that. Like people hate on them as much as they want, but like for me and my buddies that are like hardcore hip hop fans, that sort of thing, like it's like a perfect weekend for us, right? Like go watch some golf and then go to a concert afterwards with like some legitimate superstars that they have there. I'm pretty hyped for it, right? So the CJ Cup was cool. It was a little bit low key. By the way, there was like 500 people there. It was really quiet. I got to meet all the players, but it'll be a little bit more of like a concert sort of feel this weekend. So you kind of like the best of both worlds. But until then, guys, best of luck and catch you guys later on.